Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's the end of another weekday set of readings today, the readings from the Epistle to the Romans. Now we're in chapter 9. This was again a skip after yesterday's reading. Yesterday's reading was fairly short and made a couple of points. I didn't make a video yesterday. I just want to make a couple of points. Yesterday's reading from chapter 8, starting with verse 22, says, "The whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now." And this is something interesting to think about, that because of the fall of man into sin, it's not only mankind that suffers, but all of creation in various ways suffers and is waiting for God to return and to perfect the world. And also, I wanted to say something about the last verse from yesterday's reading. It says the no, the second to last verse. It says, "We know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings that cannot be uttered." And this is an interesting thing for St. Paul to say about the Holy Spirit, that uh, we do desire salvation, but we often don't fully understand what that means. Sometimes, again, it gets overcome with our desire just to receive good worldly things from God, or to have comfort and so-called happiness uh, here on earth. But because we do not know the right way to pray for our salvation, somehow the Holy Spirit does that for us. The Holy Spirit inspires us, um, not every moment, but at particular moments, and opens our mind, enlightens us, gives us a vision. I mean, not like of a ghost or something like that, but gives us a insight into what the age to come is. Now, after that, there's a large reading that the church skips, and it's actually one of the more difficult readings. It is the reading that has that word predestinated, predestined in it, that has caused so much trouble in dividing Christians from each other. But that is a reading. It's also the one of the most elevated readings. It's the one, I believe, that we are more than conquerors. Neither height nor depth nor any creature will be able to separate us from the love of God. So this is an important reading. This is a reading that's moved to a Sunday, and we will talk about it and address it in due time. But we aren't totally skipping over it, because that idea of predestination is present also in today's reading. So today's reading starts from verse 6, I think. Yeah, verse 6 of the epistle to Romans, and the ninth chapter. And St. Paul is giving examples, again, from the Old Testament, showing both Jews and Gentiles that God foreknew. He didn't set everything up. God didn't write the script, give it to mankind, and then let them film the movie. Somehow, in ways that we can't understand, in God's perfection and God's all knowledge, humanity has already finished making the movie. We were all given free will, but it's like God has seen the movie already. So God foreknew that even though he chose the Jews as his chosen people, he knew in advance that he would reveal himself to the Gentiles as well, and that the Gentiles would complete the church that was started by his particular revelation in the Old Testament to the Jewish people. And he gives these examples that Abraham's first son was not the honored one. His first son was a son with a woman that was not his wife. And therefore, his second son, despite not being the oldest, the second son, Isaac, was the one through whom God blessed the nations. Also, he gives the example of Jacob and Esau, where Jacob the younger, through being sneaky, steals the blessing from his older brother Esau. And here, again, God did not make Esau bad, and he did not make Jacob better. It's funny to talk about Jacob being better because he did lie and he did trick to get his position. But we see that once he got there, he was the more appropriate of the two to be the leader of the Jewish people, that the Jewish nation became greater under his leadership than it would have under under Esau. I don't know if leadership is the right word, but he was the inspiring figure. He was the one that went out and did great things. Yes, at the beginning of his life, he employed trickery and sneakiness together with his mother to cheat his brother, but God foreknew that that would be for the best in the end. And this is what St. Paul is getting at today, and this will continue in Monday's reading as well, is God knows what is going on in people, and we do not. So there are these difficult verses near the end of this reading, and we're left hanging again. The very last verse indicates that St. Paul is about to answer all of our questions, but now we have to wait till Monday. Um, but these are quotes actually from the Old Testament talking about Pharaoh as well. Um, so God says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. And then he continues, yeah, God will have mercy on whom he will have mercy, and whom he will, he hardeneth. And then this is the last verse for today. Thou wilt say then unto me, why doth he yet find fault? For who hath resisted his will? So this is the question. Um, Basically, the question is already being answered. God knows something that we don't. When it says that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, yes, like St. Paul is saying here, that seems unfair to us. Well, why did he do that? What does it mean that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh? But this is not disconnected from what St. Paul was saying in the beginning of this passage, where he talks about Isaac, where he talks about Jacob and Esau. God knows the heart of everyone. And God reveals himself in many ways. When we see, how was Pharaoh's heart hardened? Pharaoh's heart was hardened by seeing God's miracles. God was trying to, God gave him all of the material he needed to change his heart. He showed him miracles. He showed him that he was the one true God. He gave him all that material that he needed. But Pharaoh was having none of it. And God knew that in advance. And that gets recorded back to us as God hardened Pharaoh's heart, knowing that Pharaoh's heart was not going to change, not preventing it from changing. He did exactly the opposite. He showed the Egyptians all of his power, and the Egyptians remembered that later on. And the word about this got out through all of the people living around in the area that's now the Holy Land. So that good thing came of all of these horrible things that happened in Egypt, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, but Pharaoh's heart was hardened anyway. Pharaoh was not pre-created by God with a hardened heart, but God knew the end of the story. God knew what the end of the story was going to be anyway. If he did not work those miracles, if he had done something else, Pharaoh would not have changed in any case. So he used the hardness of Pharaoh's heart to provide examples for us, to provide a lesson to all of those who lived around Egypt about God being the one true God. So when St. Paul is coming to this next time, who are we to question, who are we to say that God does unfair when we cannot possibly understand the mind of God? We cannot possibly understand what it is like to have knowledge of intimate knowledge of the heart of every person and of the future of the world and so on. Knowing these things, God is doing something far more complex than we can imagine. There's a movement, and this movement was actually prevalent among the founding fathers of the United States. So I'm always cautious about anything that talks about a Christian nation, but I'm especially cautious when people talk about America being founded as a Christian nation. I wish it were true, and there's a lot that is sort of true about it, but there's a movement called deism, and many of the founding fathers were deists. One big example is Thomas Jefferson, who rewrote the Bible, rewrote the New Testament, removing all of the citations of Christ. I don't want to speak evil of someone after his death, but I think we need to balance this hero image that we have of people with a bit of the truth. Thomas Jefferson rewrote the Bible, taking anything miraculous out of it. So he was leading this charge that saying that Jesus Christ is a good teacher, and this is part of the deist viewpoint, which is that God wound up the world like a watch and just let it go from there. And this isn't true. God has got a much more complex plan. God is interfering, as it were, in the world in ways that we cannot possibly understand. But every single person, things happen for the sake of one person, yet not for one person. They all end up being interconnected with each other. And for us to look and say, God is making a person evil, God is hardening this person's heart, and that's not fair. That's not right for us to do so because we have no idea what inside information God has on this. We have no idea whether what uh, looks like one thing to us is actually something that God is doing, possibly to change the heart of this other person or people around. We will be back maybe tomorrow, definitely on Monday to continue reading. See you then.